I am going to try and make this, I understand for some of you this is night number 2 in a row. So I am going to try and make what I have to say pretty quick so that we can talk about whatever questions you have and get into the weeds as much as you want to or not. So, assignment based, I'm sorry, I'm Leslie Creane. Hi.
Hi. Hey, Lester. So,
I'm a consultant that the town hired to
okay, that's
redo the
what I wanted to
regs.
know. Good.
Nice to meet you. So anyway, so,
And Jamie's behind him, and he's from Economic Development Commission.
oh, great, excellent.
Is it a commission?
Vice Chair.
Economic Development Commission.
Terrific. You guys have met, most of you. Okay, so what I was charged with looking at is to look at what the possibilities are based on the plan of conservation and development that was recently adopted, and to look at what the possibilities are for the area that you are going to have to come up with a single term for. The flats, downtown Woodbridge, the village, whatever. You all are going to have to come up with some name because it gets really cumbersome to write all of that. But looking at that area and the industrial area on the other side of the West River at the base of the canal.
9341.
It's like George Stanza in the ATM booth. No.
Okay, I really am going to make this fast now. Okay, so things that, in right order. Here we go.
That was a fast presentation.
I'm a woman of my word.
Apparently.
And in reverse, it's even better.
I know.
Can't get to the answer sheet quick. Okay, so there are, I'm going to go over this really quickly. There are basically 2 theories of planning. One is use-based, one is form-based. The use-based is what you're used to. That's not why it's called use-based zoning, though. It's based on the uses that are inside of buildings. And we look at, that's the way it's been in Connecticut for forever until 2010, when Hamden adopted the first hybrid zoning, which combined use-based and form-based codes. Form-based code looks at using the buildings as design elements for the public realm, the space between buildings that make up the street. And not that there isn't the concern for what the uses are behind those facades, but understanding that it's that public realm, the place where you and I walk, or you and I drive, or we don't walk or drive, and how do we want to design that public space? And that is what buildings have a greater purpose than just the uses that they house. They have a purpose greater than that that says they contribute to the building blocks of a city block, town block. And how do we want that to look? So in this case, I looked through, I'm very familiar with the SmartCode. I did the regulations in Hamden, and I've worked on several others in the country. But in this case, there'll be no changes made to residential zones A and B. That was part of the scope, and they generally kind of were built to where they are. But I did look at how do you create strategic economic development and the buildings that will foster that, and how do you create zones that will help you do that. Okay, very few people are actually willing to make major investments in a single-story building. It doesn't get you the tax generation. So I looked at combining some of your zones in ways that make sense, not by use, but by the growth of development, and then that sort of grading back to residential development.
Can I ask you a quick question
Sure.
right at the beginning? So if you're not adjusting the residential zones, the A and
A and
B,
B, correct.
is there any expectation in what you've done here about changing any of the zones? Or was not part of the scope?
The
of
current zones,
Yeah, in other words, what's A, what's B, what's commercial, et cetera?
Yeah.
Is the expectation that they're going to stay commercial and residential or not?
other than A and B, which we're not touching at all,
Yeah.
okay? Other than that, the expectation is that they will change, that the parameters of those zones will change, and that they will change based upon how you want those areas to look and feel, as well as the uses that you want to have in them.
The reason I just asked that is when we did the last revision, right, of the Plan of Conservation and Development, there was some question about the utilization of the country club of Woodbridge, which has been around
That's
and
not
about.
in the
That's
scope.
not a consideration
Not in
in the
the
scope.
That's not in the scope.
All right. And who provided the scope to you?
Well, actually, you were at the meeting, and you were one of the people. So you were there knowing what the charge was. So the goal was, this really came about from when we were having a discussion about the gas station wanting to go in and
Well, I remember that discussion.
okay, so that was when we realized that there were so many different zones that overlapped and did all sorts of different
Mhm.
things, and so that was the main purpose of engaging Leslie, is to review that area and try to make it into zones that are more cohesive and workable for what we're trying to do and relative to our POCD.
So these are this comes out of your POCD,
Mhm.
and it comes out of the surveys that were online. And it also obviously comes out of a lot of professional experience.
Yeah, no, I was just, didn't recall the exclusions, that's all. Jeff is telling me I was there when there were exclusions. I don't believe I ever saw the scope of work. It was never given to us as a board. But I'm fine with that,
You get it?
okay?
Okay.
As long as I
That's great.
understand.
Thank you, Chris.
POCD.
Plan of Conservation and Development. It's a 10-year plan, and basically the way it works in Connecticut and most New England towns, New England
Does anybody want a
states,
hard copy of what they're looking at?
Yeah, sure.
is that you do your POCD, that's the big vision picture of what you want, but it doesn't have the regulations that actually make it happen. What we're doing now is looking at how do you make that vision actually come to life? How do you make that happen? How do you make things look the way that you want them to look and be the way that you want them to be? Okay, so SmartCode is one of the form-based codes, and it's the one that I use. And it addresses in it the aspects of creating a series of walkable spaces. Again, you creating those public spaces that are outdoor, sometimes called outdoor rooms, pedestrian, bicycle oriented, as well as automobiles. It's not anti-automobile, it just says, wait a minute, you got to pay attention to people and bicycles as well. And then it looks at what kinds of mixes can you have between residential, commercial.
Have to
This
continue.
may be easier to do on paper.
You have to move it within a certain period of time, otherwise.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
9341.
We're all gonna know that at the end.
I'm sorry, once more.
9341, and I'm not very happy with that.
Okay. So, looking at how you can mix uses so that you have as close to 24-hour occupancy of a site as possible, where that makes sense. Okay. SmartCode also looks at keeping neighborhood centers compact and rural land open. I'm going to fast forward here to, well, here. So SmartCode regulates things like the size of a block. If you have a really long block, you're less likely to walk down that block than you are if it's, and there are metrics for all of this, and that's what those thick pieces, those handouts are. So it regulates the width of lots. sizes of blocks, building setbacks, building heights. It's all your bulk regulations, placement of buildings on the lot, location of parking, dumpsters, and other accessory elements. This is what the SmartCode is based on. It's the Transect, which comes from biology. Any biologists in the crowd? Yeah, me either. But it comes from the idea that you go from a T1 zone, which is like the top of the ridges, not touched by mankind, it's just wilderness. And it works its way across. T2 is like your golf courses, your cemeteries, your open space, but it's been your ball fields, things like that. Open space, but it's been touched by man. T3 is your typical residential and sometimes with a couple of smaller non-residential uses, and we'll get back to that in a minute. And then a T4 is a mixed-use zone, which based upon everything that you've talked about in your POCD and and in the surveys, is what people are looking for in the downtown Woodbridge area. And then a T5 is a little bit more dense than that, and we can talk about whether or not you want that.
Go the other way. The other way is settings. Keep on going. Keep on going.
How do I get to the back to the thing, mail?
Yeah, come to now. There you go.
Excellent. Thank you. So it's there's a logical progression as opposed to, we've got these uses here, we've got, we need space for another use, we're going to create another zone over here for that use, and you keep doing that, and then you've got these very isolated areas that tend not to be very people-friendly. So the Transect, and using the SmartCode in conjunction with the Transect, looks at a logical progression of the use of space, both horizontally and vertically. So just to give you, and some of you have seen this before, just a quick, picture of what these look like. T1, it's as natural as it gets. T2, your farmland, your ball fields, things like that. T3, generally tight-knit suburban areas, much like the downtown residential areas that exist there now. Okay. The perfect definition of a T3 is a place that is really great for trick-or-treating if you're a kid. Even if you're a parent, you just let the kid go, you can see them, their porches, everybody can see each other and hear each other, and you come back with a lot of loot with not much walking. T4 is mixed use. This is where you have, it's most popularly defined as residential or commercial on the first floor with commercial or residential above. The ideal thing is if you have these buildings built in a way that they can change those uses over time so that you're not constantly constructing and deconstructing buildings over a short period of time, but you actually can keep buildings up for 100 or more years. It's a much more environmentally sustainable way to develop, and it's also generally lends itself to a more, for lack of a better word, a more picturesque way of designing. You have certain proportions for your first floor that the uses behind them can change, but for instance, a greater percentage of glass on your first floor than you do above. And all of that is in here, and we'll go over that quickly. Your normal typical zoning, the stuff that you have now, the maps are basically coded as the rectangle on the left is. When you look at form-based code, it's coded based on the transect on the right. Just to be really clear, and I promise you we'll find ourselves in this box again, and I'll remind you, but there's certain things that zoning can do and there's certain things that zoning can't do. Okay? Zoning can determine uses. It can say, can I put a restaurant here, yes or no? And if so, under what conditions? Can I put my building here on the lot, or can I put my building there on the lot? Zoning can do that. Zoning cannot regulate aesthetics, it can't regulate style, so you love Gothic, you cannot say all of downtown has to be Gothic. You can't regulate paint color. This is just under straight zoning regulations. It's a whole different story if you're doing a historic district, just so we're clear. But under regular, plain old zoning regulations, the other thing you can't regulate is behavior. If you don't remember anything else, remember that one, because everybody wants to regulate behavior, and you can't with zoning regulations. Okay, so I'm not going to, you all can have copies of this. I'm not going to go read through all of this. But the values that you talked about in your POCD are generally the guiding principles that were used here. So, changes that affect all zones in the downtown area. These are some of the things that are included in the packets that look kind of like this.
Mr. Chairman, can you just, so those of us who don't understand, get clarity as to what we mean by downtown area?
Leslie can explain.
Okay. I wanna-
Well, because we haven't actually said this is the actual line of.
Okay, so this
But,
is the
but the
general.
idea is that the whole area at the bottom of the hill, I don't want to
Okay.
call it the flats, I'm afraid to call it anything actually.
Okay, I just wanted to make
Some
sure.
people like
that
some
I
people don't, but
understood.
that whole area.
Okay.
So,
You're-
and those
you're
areas will
going-
be...
I think you're going in a little different direction, because one of the things Jimmy's interested in is the industrial area and what.
This is part of that.
Right.
Yes, looking at
Right.
all of that.
Yes.
And there are different zones within that area. It's not that the whole area is going to be one zone. So, so here, what I was looking at is, number one, clearly stating the intention of the regulation that follows. Most zoning regulations just don't have that anymore. It's, everybody's zoning regulations were in all likelihood state of the art when they were adopted. But that was a really long time ago. And they've been amended and things have been added and subtracted, and trust me, Woodbridge is not you're not alone, and you're far from the worst that I've seen. So health, safety, and welfare, that's your charge. As government commissions, it somehow has to relate back to health, safety, and welfare. Protection of environmental and natural resources, growth and development, sometimes those two things come to loggerheads. You need to make choices about, in specific circumstances, which one are you going to value over the other. And it'll be different answers for different places of, I'm just going to call it downtown. Different parts of downtown, you're going to, the thumb's going to go down a little heavier on one side of the scale than the other, depending upon where you're looking at. Circulation, both pedestrian, bicycle, and vehicular. And updating the definitions, which will be one of the very last things I do, because you want to make sure you're putting definitions in of words that are actually in there, and taking out definitions of words and terms that are not in there. And that can only be done at the end. Adding text and diagrams. people look at things differently.
This is for the, in the regs.
This is in the regs. This is what you're going to find
Yeah.
in here that's different from what you have now.
Right.
Now, some of, you have some diagrams. It's just, it's adding more. It's adding different ones that are, that explain different things. And we can go through that. Making the document itself cohesive.
The
So
intent,
that-
the intent is to take the ambiguity out of
Yes,
every time somebody wants to do something.
yes, well said. And so that you know when you go to pick that document up, what chapter are you likely to find what you're looking for? And something that makes sense in terms of a progression. Also removing the aquifer protection regulations, DEEP, I missed an E, now requires that those be a separate set of regulations. So you'll just have to adopt those separately from this. Right now they're incorporated.
What are you calling DEP? Or give me an example. We have a comparative index or
Sorry?
what would that, how would that be how does that affect us?
You have your aquifer protection regulations right now included in your,
Right.
and DEP requires that they be a separate set of regulations. So you're just going to have,
Leslie, we don't know where we have any aquifer protection zones in Woodbridge presently.
okay, you may not have any, in which case you just get rid of the whole thing. But we're not going to get rid of the whole thing, we're just going to divide it right now until we answer that question. So, some of this is also just bringing things up to be consistent with current state statute. Some of this is just sort of the donkey work that goes with this. So, more things. Specifying locations and design for dumpsters and their enclosures. Some of this is really like the crappy stuff, like, okay, great, we don't want it out in the front. Good, Leslie, you do that. Figure it out. But these are the kinds of things that neighbors fight over. These are the kinds of things that actually matter. If you're walking down the street, you don't want to be walking by a dumpster. But if that's the only place that somebody thinks that they can put it, you want to have the teeth in your regulations to discourage that, and they better have a real hardship if they're going to go to ZBA for some other reason. And that's just one example. Show how buildings can be placed on lots so that they contribute to the character of the existing area. That's what we were talking about before. Expanding standards on grading, cutting, and filling. One of the issues that I ran into Hamden, and you guys have the benefit of learning from lots of issues that I got paid to deal with elsewhere, is there are times when people can't get anything out. They don't know what to do with their property, and we had a case where somebody just wanted to mine the property. They wanted to take the gravel, create a gravel pit basically, and they were having a hard time getting approvals for things because they basically had bought a hillside. Well, you don't get to destroy a hillside and then say, oh, now it's flat and now I can do everything. So what these regulations say is, if you want to cut and fill, it has to be consistent with and part of a special permit application. If you got to go the 9 yards, you got to have skin in the game. You have to say, I'm doing a real project, and only in conjunction with that would you then have the authority that you would give them as the commission to then alter the topography of the site. And that would be part of your consideration. Okay. Things like limiting hours of construction. Okay, it sounds like a little thing until you start getting beaten up by it Monday morning, first thing when they, all the people in the area are calling you and saying, how come you didn't say they couldn't work at 6:30 in the morning on a Sunday? Lighting. Light the night is a big issue. It was not an issue at all. Nobody had ever heard of it or thought of it when your regulations were originally adopted, I promise you. It's just not a consideration. Looking at ways, number one, requiring full cutoff fixtures so that all the light is going down. You're not getting light into the sky. And then number 2, a set of standards for minimum and maximum illumination. Minimum for safety purposes and maximum so that you're not, you don't need to be able to read by, 50 feet away from a street light. And there's tables galore. Okay. Parking is a big issue, takes up a lot of space, and there are a lot of things that you can do now with parking areas that were never thought to be an issue before. One of the things about parking is that it generally in commercial areas is on impervious surface. It's asphalt. Okay, that's fine. But what if I have a doctor's office, and based on the size of the doctor's office, it's determined that I don't really need to park any more than 10 cars. But the doctor says, oh no, I'm going to be such a success that I'm going to have people coming in every 7.5 minutes instead of every 15 minutes, and I need more parking. Well, for economic development purposes, you may not want to say you can't have that, but you might want to be able to say, you want to be sure that that's really what you want, and you don't want to just pave your whole area because it's easier to maintain and you think your business will go up, but it may not. So requiring that any parking in excess of what you require be pervious surface. Now, it can be the grass block, it can be pervious pavement, it can be gravel, it can be all kinds of things. But looking at how to recharge your water in a way that isn't, that it doesn't all have to go into your storm sewers. Okay, so a lot of this stuff is environmentally based as well as economically based. Other things that you might want to consider is allowing for street parking to count toward the parking for the building. Okay, you don't have to do any of this stuff. These are things that have worked elsewhere and I think are worth serious consideration. We did this in Hamden and it's worked very well. The other thing is shared parking for mixed use. Often mixed use buildings, particularly when an element is residential and another element is commercial or retail, they don't need to have parking space for everybody that lives there plus a parking space for everybody who might come visit that retail or commercial use. So there's a table and a formula to use that says you can decrease the amount of parking that you need if you have mixed use. Okay, some of this is just really crappy stuff, but it makes a difference in the end. Landscaping around utility boxes. A lot of times these big utility boxes along the sidewalks they're just ugly. And if there's a way to do something about it in an area that is, just to make it better. Telecommunications text, revising it so that it meets statutory requirements now. Almost everything goes to the Siting Council now. That wasn't the case when you passed the regulations. Incorporating a list of street trees. There are trees that get planted on streets that are really, really, really bad for sidewalks and roadways. They heave sidewalks. They drop fruit. They drop leaves that when they become wet get very slippery. Some leaves are better wet than others. And so there's a list of street trees that don't have those issues. And then, when you require street trees for an application, developers know exactly where to go to look and what to pick from. I know gas station, big issue here. Drive-throughs, gas stations, things like that can be done in a way that can actually work aesthetically. Okay? If you look at the image here, this is, you're bringing the building up to the street, which starts to develop a street wall that people generally feel more comfortable walking along than walking along the side of a big parking lot. Okay, if there's a giant parking lot, people generally don't use the sidewalk that's next to it. You start bringing the buildings up to the front, but usually with gas stations, the pumps are all in the front. There's no reason you can't have the pumps in the back. And this is just an easy image that shows that. Also setting queuing standards. If you're going to have drive-throughs, the state does that, but you may want to look at it too. Okay, we talked about location of accessory structures. In some of these, it's in section 6, you'll see there are different uses that are broken out by primary use and accessory use. So if you have an accessory building, now in the case, we're not dealing too much with residential properties, but for the sake of explanation, I'm going to use a residential property. You've got the house as the principal building, you've got the garage in the back as the accessory building. How far away does that garage have to be from the property lines so that you can maintain your garage, but you're losing the use of most of your property? Okay? It's the same thing with a commercial property. You have a storage shed for whatever, and you've got your primary use for your business. How do those two buildings work on the lot? Typically, accessory buildings are not what you want up front on the street. Okay, so there are numbers in there. Talked about street trees. Types of zoning permits. The first couple of pages of section 6 have charts with a whole bunch of different uses, and then you'll see most of it's not filled in. And that's because we need to sit down and have a real serious talk about what goes into those blocks. Some things you won't allow in certain zones, okay? But it gets coded by special permit, special exception, site plan, by right, or not allowed at all. That way, when somebody comes into the office and says, I'm thinking about buying a piece of property in the industrial area and I want to do this, it's really easy. Staff opens it up and says, great, it's an allowed use, you need to do it by site plan, doesn't require a special hearing, this is what you need. And in the zoning regulations is the checklist of what you need for each type of application, what's required. Okay. So the other thing that this document does is, even though it looks complicated right now, you'll see as you go through it, it's not so bad. It actually makes it more user-friendly. Okay, this looks way worse than it is. It's actually a single sheet that has all, yeah, I know you like it, Jeff. It's all pictures. That's you and me. But it's got all, in fact, it's got all the information you need for a single zone on one page. Now, it doesn't have all the auxiliary information. But basically, if you're coming in to find out if you can do something, staff can just print that up and say, this isn't the only thing you need, but this is the gist of it. And it'll have all your numbers on it, setbacks, build to lines, how tall a building has to be. One of the things you'll see here, okay. And I know you can't possibly read it from here, but in this area right here, in some zones, you may want to say you have to have a building that's 2 stories high. It can't just be 1 story. It has to appear from the outside to be 2 stories. Now, if you don't want to use all of that and you want to put, you know, your stuffed animal collection in the attic on the second floor of that building, that's fine, but it has to appear from the street to be 2 stories because that's the kind of building that we want to create along the street. And that presents a very different character than if this building's 1 story, this building's 3 stories, the next lot is basically an empty parking lot, and you keep going. So it's about creating that character, and this is how we do that.
And also creating that outdoor room.
Mhm. And then, this is in your packets, that, in a form you can actually read. So, the other thing is, downtown Woodbridge that's your economic generator. And you may, whatever happens with the country club or a few other select small places, they're basically single lots, you may have things that contribute, but that's not really that's not where the town makes its tax money. It's non-residential. I ran numbers when I did this in Hamden. 6 months after we passed the regulations, I knew that we hadn't downzoned any property, so I knew for sure I had not in any way had the commission negatively impact the tax base. So that I knew as a given, but I didn't know what we've done in the other direction in terms of metrics. And so 6 months after we passed the regulations, I sat down and I ran the numbers, which, believe it or not, in 2010 had a lot to do with an Excel spreadsheet and a pencil and an eraser. I ran the numbers and I couldn't believe the answers I was getting, and I thought, I'm doing something wrong. Remember back when you took algebra or some other math class and you kept doing this, making the same mistake because it just happened. You couldn't see it. And I thought, okay, I got to put this away for a few months. I can't look at this. I'm doing something wrong because these numbers are too big. And I went back 6 months after that, did the whole exercise all over again from scratch. In Hamden, we have a T5 zone, which is a little bit more than I think what you're looking for, although there may be a few spaces where we want to consider it, again, up for conversation. And so I ran the numbers, and in a T5 zone alone, which is a more intensely urban area, 5 stories maximum building height, and mostly office use. The increase in the tax base was based on square footage, was 2,200%. So what you can do with design and your zoning regulations, even though you are legally not allowed to take into account taxes or the number of children that can enter your school system, you're prohibited from considering those things by state statute. If you know you're not downzoning a property, you know you're upzoning, you can do those calculations on the back end. And I promise I won't let you go too far afield without at least letting you know really clearly with lots of flashing lights, whoa, time out. This is what you're doing, make sure you're doing it on purpose. Okay, so next steps. I need, and you all can decide how you want to do it, whether you want to pick a subcommittee or you want to all do this together. But we need to sit down and really have some, page by page. I think I found no typos, but we'll find those too. But page by page, go over everything, make sure it makes sense.
And the draft regulations is this.
Yes, and I have not given you all the chapters because I'm not going to give you at this point, there was no point in giving you a chapter on, with all the legal language that makes it legal to do this. You'll have that in the front. The definitions, as I said, doesn't make sense to do that. This is the meat. Let's get this done,
So
and the
this
rest
is-
is easy.
So these are, if I see it correctly, it's sections 3, 4, and 5.
Yep.
And did you indicate, because that's what I was looking at.
Oh, you were looking for section 6, because I did,
Yeah, there's no section 6.
yeah, I'll point it out to you in 1 second.
Oh, okay.
Um,
And did you indicate in here, wherever possible, because I saw some you did and some you didn't, which are new and which is existing? Because, I mean, when you underscored it, I would assume it's new.
Yes.
But, for instance, this whole thing is not,
Here's what happens.
and I know it's new.
Here's what happens. I always start and I try and do a track changes.
Okay.
And I'm never gonna, this was like the final time. I'm never gonna do it again. I'm never gonna start with track changes because it changes so much that if you have it all there, it's so confusing to read.
So in effect, for us,
This is
look
a
at the whole
clean-
thing as new.
Right.
Okay, that's what I want.
And I'd rather have you do that because I want you to not just look at it as old and new, but I want you to look at it in its totality. Does it make
That's fine,
sense as a
as long as I
document?
understand that. That's okay.
But the, I was referring
Yes.
to, there you go.
This is cool.
Um,
And that's fine.
Okay, so here's your list of
Yeah.
uses, okay? And you'll see that, you know,
Take a line.
it's all black, it's all blank,
Yep.
except for a few that are just in there as examples.
And it
There's
shows
red
which-
and green in the language. Is there any
Sorry?
significance to that? Some of the language is red, some of it is green.
The language that's red is, I always highlight sections that are referred back to, and they change. So you don't ever know what section it's really going to be until it's finally been formatted. So to put in, refer to section 3.5, by the time we all get finished with it, that could end up being, 3.15. So it's just in there to make sure we don't miss it, and I'll know to go back to
So
it.
your use of holiday colors is not significant.
I promise you, it's not at all significant. Has nothing to do with that. Okay, so we finished the draft. Yeah, Jerry.
We all had 5 minutes to look at this and with the staff. But I wonder, and I think your table bulk regulations is exactly, not so much bulk regulations, but your use regulations is spot on. What is been one of our difficulties with our present zoning regulations is that a business coming to town could never tell whether it was allowed or not because of the change of use rate, present arcade change of use regulation. But and I presume that all this is these blank areas are areas are up for discussion.
Absolutely.
But I can't help but notice that our present Bev 2 zone, proposed to be the SD1 zone, has, for residential density, a minimum of 4 dwelling units and a maximum of 16 dwelling units per acre. And this is a zone that we presently don't allow any dwelling units in at all. And I think it's a rather fundamental concept that you may be speaking to.
It's a very good point. There are a lot of areas where you don't allow residential at all. One of the biggest advantages of allowing mixed use is that there are several, but you allow for eyes on the street over the course of 24 hours a day. So that if you've got a utility box and in the back and it's a commercial use on the first floor, say it's a restaurant or something. Now if it's a restaurant and there's nothing else open around it, you're basically at the mercy of your alarm system and passing police until the morning. If you have people who are living upstairs, they're not doing any harm to the restaurant, but they're keeping an ear out and they're keeping an eye out, and they're going to know. Sort of the see something, say something kind of thing. And they're going to deter activity that might be unwanted. The other piece of it is you know, that's sort of the deterring the negative part. But on the positive side is, you have a place for people to live where they can walk downstairs and go to the restaurant, and they can walk next door and go to the bank, and they can walk another few feet and get their hair cut. They've never had to get in their car. They don't even have to get on a bicycle. So depending upon what uses you allow in that zone, consistent with allowing residential uses, the residential uses are not likely to be houses.
And it also goes back to, again, to one of the points in the POCD was not everybody can afford to come up to Woodbridge and buy a house, but they want to live in Woodbridge, and so there are, you know, smaller rental units that people could come and live in and create this neighborhood.
Yep, absolutely.
In that same vein, while you said that none of these changes that you're proposing affect the residence A and B zone,
Correct.
you do in your text, in your proposed text, introduce accessory dwelling units in any zone.
In any zone other, there is nothing that I am proposing that has to do with the A zone or B zone or the country club.
You can always
It's
go, well, we can always go back and talk about that, but technically, no.
It's just
And
not in
that,
the
by the way,
scope.
goes back to us talking about, do we want to allow in-law apartments? That
Exactly.
kind of thing. So that's where this is coming from. So yes, so that would be actually an example of one of the things we may want to, at another time, think about for A and B. Yeah.
And again, and when you study the market, the housing market now is for it's rental or it's not really condominium, but primarily rental for empty nesters and millennials. And they're the people with the money. They're the people with the expendable income.
I don't mind that.
You're the ice cream and pizza, just like me.
You know, I just want to go back to the in-law apartment, just for everyone's sake. It's not, an in-law apartment doesn't necessarily mean an accessory building. I want to be clear about that. For instance, Orange is part of the structure. There's,
Yeah, the
I think,
naked
700 square feet. You can take 700 square feet out of a house and create an in-law apartment. So it doesn't have to be, I don't want
There are
to
all
mislead
kinds of
anybody
right.
about in-law apartment can be an accessory building.
No, and there are all kinds of ways to define it, and that's,
Yeah.
you know, those are some of the things that we would want to talk about if we're looking at that, is, does it have to be attached? How big can it be? Does one of the units have to be owner occupied? I mean, there are all kinds of things, again, all geared toward how are you helping to create a neighborhood and a character of a place that meets what you outlined in your POCD and what we all kind of imagine. I mean, we all have very similar ideas about what makes for a comfortable place, and we know when we're not comfortable. I teach part-time also, and one of the exercises I do with my students is I'll bring them to a street and I'll say, okay, how far down do you feel comfortable walking by yourself in the daylight, but how far down this street do you, and it can be any street. And when they say, well, yeah, see where that tree is right there? I think that's about where I'd stop. And then we have a conversation about why. What is it that's beyond that you either can see or you can't see that makes you comfortable or uncomfortable? All of a sudden, the buildings start to move away from the street. I can't really tell what's there. All of a sudden, there's nothing there. That's just brush. I can't really tell what's there. And then, believe it or not, at some point we really will be all finished and we'll have a final draft, and that final draft will,
Okay, so actually, to Jamie's point this morning, but as far as what's referred to as the corporate park, what are we actually thinking about?
so one thing that I did not actually send to you guys, and I'll send to you tomorrow, is the draft of the results from the surveys. And people are looking for access to the lake, Some people are looking for access to the lake just to look at it. Few people want to be able to take boats out on it. Somebody actually wanted to live on it.
Just don't go in it.
Okay. But there's, and then, that's a whole other government department of how do you clean it up. Okay. But people were generally in favor of mixed use. You've got fairly light industry there. It's just all in Butler buildings. It's all in relatively efficient but unattractive metal buildings.
But
And
is there a
so-
way to make it more attractive?
Absolutely. And one of the ways you do that is by building a street wall. If you look at a map of that area, you'll notice that the narrow side of the building faces the street. And then you get these long buildings going back. But you have a lot of space in between them that's used for lawn and parking. It's kind of the parking, you need the parking, but it doesn't have to be there. If you turn those buildings, and I'm not saying we should turn them all, but if you can infill and use that land in a way that is more efficient, put your parking in the back, then you have a way of walking up and down that area so that if you want to go out, if you have a day like today, and you actually can go out to eat your lunch, not eating it at your desk, you can take a walk up and down, and it doesn't feel like you're walking around an industrial park. It feels like you're walking around a place where there might
Corporate
be
park.
other people.
Corporate park.
Corporate park, okay. Sorry, my apologies to everybody for,
Mainly
don't
James.
mean anything by it. So the other thing is looking at doing multi-story there. Now, one of the issues with that area is it's a floodplain. Okay, so there are structural issues, and there are, flooding issues that would need to be taken into account. But it doesn't mean that you can't still make it look better and feel better.
Is it still, even with all the work they've done on the bridges and the farther down,
It's still listed as a floodplain.
Still
Still,
mapped,
yeah.
So,
still mapped.
you know if it actually is a floodplain still? Does it still
There's
flood?
been no remapping effort, there's been no.
It still floods down there. I live right down there. It still floods.
Okay.
And we haven't had a big storm.
You haven't had any-
Yeah, we haven't had a
Rain.
really big storm,
You
so
need-
I think,
you need
yeah,
rain.
the rain is not
Diminish.
there, so, but it does.
And even if it wasn't wet, if FEMA doesn't change its flood designation, it doesn't change its flood
Right.
designation.
Okay, so there are things that you will all need to do. Once this is done, there are other steps that you will need to do in order to make it work. Okay? That's not the end of it. It's also one of the reasons that I, have in my agreement with the town that there's a certain number of hours after it's all done that go to staff training, can go to commission training. ZBA is going to be critical, honestly, because that's where people who don't understand or don't like it, for whatever reason, are going to try and go and get it to go back the way it was, because that's the way we always did it. And so it's actually really critical that ZBA understand the big picture as well as the reason for some of the smaller moves. It's you're all land use, and you all should be working toward the same goal, and it really is a team effort.
Excuse me, by the way, how many people did actually fill out the questionnaire?
Over 400.
Really?
Yeah, I can't remember.
Fantastic.
All Woodbridge residents?
Yes. Or not all necessarily
Or
Woodbridge,
business
they could be
owners.
business
Yeah.
owners, they could be people
Yeah.
who are, their kid goes to daycare here, or, but there's some, honestly,
Sometimes.
was there some rogue person who came across this from Massachusetts?
Probably.
Never know.
It absolutely could
It's
have
rigged.
happened.
It's all rigged.
It's all rigged. It absolutely could have happened. It was not in any case enough to change anything. I'm just looking here for the actual number, but it was a staggering total. I was really impressed. My understanding is that with the POCD, I think Betsy told me that the highest return on anything was 70 people. So,
Did you break it down by people that live down in the
Nope.
bill? Okay.
nope. The point of it was not, if we were doing a specific neighborhood where people live and work, and we really wanted to know what, we do it in a way that restricted access to the survey, so that it was just the people that live there or work there. That was exactly the opposite of what we wanted to do. We wanted to know what people wanted in this area so that they would come down, or what they didn't like and was keeping them from coming downtown. Does that make sense? Okay. So the next steps are all the legal steps, commission hearings, and we have to send it to COG, and I will lead you in the right direction on all of that. That's my email if anybody has any questions. And
I have one
Stop
quick
talking
question.
about-
Did you compare us to any towns in Connecticut or, New Jersey, New York, that are kind of like us, that we have old regs and stuff like that? Did you compare us to anything?
I can compare you to almost every other municipality in
Okay.
Connecticut.
Yeah. 'Cause
I mean, in a whole lot, in Massachusetts, in New Jersey, I mean, this is not, believe it or not, you're still on the cutting edge, because so few municipalities have really taken this on and said, we need to update this.
Mhm.
And particularly looking at incorporating the form-based code, nobody wanted to be first. That's why I have a really big sign on my back, but you may not be able to see, but it says crazy.
Now Hamden's done it.
Hannah
right?
was the first to do it in Connecticut
Okay.
on a municipal-wide basis.
Okay.
It's been done, sometimes it gets done for private development. Actually, Jeff and I worked on one years ago, more years than either of us will admit ever, right? It's one of the secrecy. We worked on a private development years ago where, there was a single developer, really large piece. They were going to build a village, and I worked.
Oh, this was, Max,
Yeah, and
quick project.
yeah, we did it. We worked on a couple together, and I worked on the regulations for that. We also worked on one in near Rochester, New York. I worked on several around the country, several in Connecticut as well, and people are now getting used to the idea that you can use buildings as building blocks for the block, and that when you put those blocks together in the right way, you actually create an area. And by the way, the people who developed a lot of these templates actually went out with measuring tapes years ago and measured they'd look at a street and they'd say, okay, this is a really cool street. This feels comfortable. We like this street. We all agree we like this street. Why? What is it about the dimensions of the elements of this street that make it what we like? Does it have stoops? How, what is the percentage of glazing on the first floor compared to above? Is it, when you have a storefront, if you think about a traditional storefront, I'm not talking about Target or, the big boxes. When you have just a storefront, you tend to have a lot more glass on that first floor. Now, a lot of them are only single story, but if you have multiple stories, then they start to get to a more residential scale in terms of those windows.
And it doesn't have to be residential, it can be offices.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And what you really want to do is to have those buildings built, as I said before, so that they can change use over time. They come back to the commission and say, okay, the market's changed. It's 10 years after the regulation's been passed. The market's changed, and the millennials have all moved out. They've all bought, all of our houses, and we moved elsewhere. We're in the 55 and over, developments. But everybody needs more office space. There's a demand for more office space, and we'd like to change the second and third floor of our building from residential to commercial. Well, you maintain your tax base, you maintain the character of your street, because you haven't changed anything outside. The windows are all the same size, windows for an office building and, or office space, and windows for residential can be comparable. You still have that activity level on the first floor, and you still have those buildings closer together so that they can still keep the economy, that use economy of what are those services? You know, getting your hair cut, going to the bank, going to the dry cleaners, you know, picking up a quart of milk, whatever. Yep.
One more quick one, sorry.
Take your time.
Is this plan or your study or plan discuss traffic patterns, you know, going one way or,
That's a
you know?
great question.
Yeah.
No. And the reason for that is the jurisdiction of zoning regulations. Do I have an opinion about those things? Absolutely. Is it based on a whole lot of experience and education? Absolutely. And I will always freely offer my opinion. I will tell you it's my opinion versus it's state statute. I'm always very clear about what you have to do versus what you might want to consider. But those are really important things to consider. And let me just give you one example. You can't put it in your zoning regulations, but your traffic authority has jurisdiction over these things. One-way streets. Conventional wisdom is that one-way streets are safer. One-way streets are actually not safer. A couple of reasons. Now, some of this depends on the width and speed limit and all of those things. One-way streets are less safe. If you know that something's coming toward you, you're going to go slower. It's instinct. Everybody does it. The other thing is, when you're driving north, you can only see the south side of a building, the front and the south side. Because nobody's driving looking like this. At least they're not driving for very long. So you can't ever see the north side of a building. If you have two-way traffic, you have at least the implied perception, even if people aren't really looking, if they see something odd, they'll notice. But you've got visibility from the street of three sides of a building rather than just two. Really easy for somebody to hide on that north side and create, you know, whatever kind of mischief. So it's a real urban legend, for lack of a better term. It's two-way streets are definitely safer than one-way streets. And just to piggyback on that, while I'm giving the traffic lesson, there are two kinds of speed. There's posted speed and design speed. Your posted speed is what you get your tickets for. The sign says 25 miles an hour, you get caught doing 35, you get a ticket. That's what it says on the sign. Your design speed is what you feel comfortable driving on the road, regardless of the sign. If streets aren't designed to allow traffic to go at the speed that you want it to go, and in denser areas you want it to be slower, it's another reason why on-street parking is another thing that will slow traffic down. Like, I can do this for like 8 hours, so I'm going to stop. I'm happy to answer any other. Please do, because honestly, the more you all understand why some of these things are in here, the better it is. You can explain it to people who come before you. You can explain it at dinner parties. It's a real conversation killer. Yeah.
Leslie, following up on this form-based, okay, because that's obviously very much different than Euclidean. All of us, when we went to law school, grew up on Euclidean, so I remember all of this, right? Back of your hand.
The law still holds.
It does. But one of the concerns is, I guess if we're at the cutting edge or not far off, and a lot of this isn't really in place, maybe you might want to suggest to us, because a lot of us are better learners through looking than we are with language. And if we're going to be designing language, which is great, I think we might want to have the experience of how this actually looks. So, you know, in Hamden, there may be places that now have adopted this, because it takes some time from the reg itself to actually how it's being used. So I'm wondering whether or not you can assist us, because when we want to look at something to see how it's going to work out, that may help us in terms of the design of the language also.
No question, it's a really good point. It's not a magic bullet, it doesn't happen overnight. Depending upon the economy, it might take 20 years for it really to flush out. Okay. One of the nice things is it creates a predictability to what, if you own a piece of property downtown, it creates predictability in terms of what the next developer on the next parcel is going to be able to do. So you know what your level of risk is. The less risk you have, the more likely you are to develop. Okay, so I can tell you a couple of places in Hamden to go look that have been built since. But the best thing I can do is to have you Google. You can Google New Urbanism. You can Google Mashpee. What's it called?
Rosemary Beach.
Rosemary Beach. Seaside was
It is
one of the
Mashpee.
first. Mashpee Commons. That's it.
Seaside.
Seaside, and I can, you know.
So include it in an email at some point in time to
Sure.
staff, and they'll
Sure.
get it over to us without, you know.
So there are a lot of places in the South have built this way, and a lot of them have built this way because they got flooded out in either hurricanes or there was some kind of dramatic event, and where they just had to start all over again.
But the closest example is the new Chase Bank in New Haven across from the Amity Shopping Center, which was built right on the property line, on Amity Road in front of the Amity Shopping
Oh.
Center. All of the drive-throughs are in the back, all the parking is in the back. And it couldn't be a more poignant example, I believe, of form-based zoning, although New Haven doesn't have it. And I'm not sure that New Haven understands that that's in New Haven.
Nor does the bank.
Right. But it's interesting, where you come out of the front door of the bank and you are on Amity Road. I mean, it's literally built with no front yard. All drive-throughs in the back, all parking in the back.
And that's a really good example of a T4. The thing about form-based code is that it covers every aspect. It covers from, you don't build anything here, but maybe, you allow a porta potty or something. But, there's nothing here. But it looks at the transition from that no-built environment to a highly built environment. So it's that transition. But Terry's right, it's a good example of, now imagine if you had many of those next to each other. It's very hard to look at something in, just singularly. The AAA building on Whitney Avenue in Hamden, they replaced the old AAA building. And we told them you have to build 2 stories. And they said, well, we don't want to pay taxes on 2 stories. And we said, okay, we don't care what you use that second story for. And they ended up putting their HVAC systems there. No problem. But from the outside, it appears as a 2-story building. Okay. Another that is a good example of a change in feeling, what it can do to change how you feel in a space. It's not the greatest example in terms of the aesthetics of the building. Is the corner of Dixwell Avenue and Mather Street. It is, if you're coming from the Parkway, you go south on Dixwell and you go past Home Depot, and there used to be 2 lights, now there's only one by where the post office is on the right. At the light where you take a left.
It's an auto parts store now, right?
Right. But at some point, and this is a really good example of how You can change the use without having to change the building, because the way that it's designed, and again, it's vinyl siding, it's not, there's nothing great about the architecture of it all. But you could put a bakery in there without having to change a single thing on the outside. In 10 years, the auto parts store goes away, mediocre use, not the kind of thing everybody wants in their backyard. Somebody figures out they can make more money doing something else. Well, you don't own an auto parts store, do you?
I do not.
He has a bakery.
Lovely place for a bakery and coffee shop.
It's gonna turn into a battery store for cars.
Hey, whatever. But when you take that left onto Mather Street, and I can tell you because I don't live far from there, the feeling that you get when you go through that is very different. It's suddenly much more compressed. The road width hasn't changed. Sidewalks are still in the same place. The buildings, every other building around it hasn't changed. It's still the same thing. But the feeling you get when you turn down that roadway, it's really hard to do this if you didn't drive through there beforehand, but it gives you a sense that you're becoming compressed. You should go a little slower because you're going into something that's different than Dixwell Avenue.
How did, in Hamden, how are you guys encouraging people, current property owners, to, almost tear down their buildings if they want? Or are you not, or are you just...
Okay, I should first disclaimer, I no longer work there, so I'm not doing anything personally.
Yeah.
She no
But
longer works there. She works in Derby. That's
okay.
another
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, we will
I
talk
have all
about
kinds of
Derby
other
later.
things.
Okay, yeah.
Derby's going to be an
Yeah.
amazing place in a little while.
It will be.
It is,
I
absolutely. It's
understand.
gonna
If Joe ever puts up that hotel.
Yeah.
So
another one.
But you know what I mean? So down...
You don't encourage, it's not about encouraging anybody to tear anything down
Yeah.
and put something new up. It's about when somebody chooses to, with their property rights, to do something different with their property, these are the rules that they have to follow. And that's what makes it different. And it may not make it different today or tomorrow or a year from now, but 10 years from now, it'll be really different. And 20 years from now, you'll look back on old pictures and say, wow.
No, you're not encouraging people to tear buildings down, but there's a certain encouragement knowing that suddenly in that zone where they have a one-story building, they could actually have a three-story building
Absolutely.
and collect more rents and et
Your
cetera, et
income
cetera.
producing potential for a site
Which is good for the town,
increases,
good
which
for
is
the-
great for the town. It's great for the character of the neighborhood.
Now, would Blueback Square be an example of a
Perfect.
positive?
Yes.
Glastonbury.
Blueback Square is probably the best in Connecticut for area that's really lively. They could have done with another 2 or 3 stories instead of, some of their buildings could have been a little bit higher than they are now, and it would have been, the incomes would have been higher and the taxes would have been higher. So it's that balance of revenue versus, to the city or the town, and revenue to the property owner compared to the cost of building.
Can I ask one quick follow-up question on the, in Hamden, did you do any form-based zoning for any of the residential zones? Or is that?
We did not touch the residential
Okay.
zones, and the reason that we didn't, primarily, there were 2 reasons, but the primary reason is it's almost all built out.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
It's almost completely built. The other thing is, those are people's castles, It's just, it's one step at a time. And the neighborhoods were diverse enough that if you wanted to live in an area, if you're familiar with Spring Glen, where it's a really great place to go trick-or-treating, and that's what you're looking for. If you're looking for that kind of a neighborhood, you look in Spring Glen, or you look in Whitneyville, or you look in Newhall, or you look in some of the areas surrounding southern Dixwell. If you're looking for 2 acres where you don't have to know your neighbor, much less have to say hello to them, you have to drive to your mailbox to get your mail every day, but you don't have to, then you go to the northern area of Danvers.
No, Woodbridge.
That's it. But it really is all about allowing those opportunities. So it's not about saying you have to do this, this is right, this is wrong. It's about having those opportunities in the appropriate places, at the appropriate scale, and being able to measure that against what you want as a municipality in terms of, how big do you want your population to be? That's a reasonable question to ask. Do you want a lot of people living here? Do you want a sleepy town? Do you want, if you have, the smaller you are, the less flexibility you have in terms of the amount of tax dollars that you take in and what you can do with them. You can also go to the other end of the spectrum. Most people are pretty comfortable somewhere in the middle. So that's what we're looking for.
Okay, so I think that was great. Thanks.
Thank you to everybody who helped with all of the electronics. Made that work. Thank you very much.
Thank you for bringing your iPad. So we don't actually have that much next month on our agenda, so I was thinking we should maybe try to read through this and start talking about it some more at our next meeting.
Do you want to go through it section by section?
One, I would like to, let's just keep moving on this thing, so. Why don't we get through at least the first section, try to get through more and see what we know.
By the way, is there any mapping? I didn't see.
Yeah, there will be. But
So there isn't yet.
what
but
you'll
you will
see
have.
on, you'll be able to tell whether it on the top of the use page, you'll see there are two rows. One is the proposed zones and the other is the existing zones. And you'll see how they're generally, some of them are just generally combined.
And does it make sense for us to have you at the next meeting to, assuming everybody does their homework?
Yeah. I mean, I could, at this point, I mean, I can keep going, but it doesn't make sense for me to keep going
Well,
until
everyone's
there's some
familiar and
feedback.
happy.
And please feel free to email me if you have questions between now and then. I'd rather that everybody was, as up to speed in terms of, some of the language may not be familiar. Some of it, I'm gonna tell you, really boring. It's deadly boring, some of it. but
Just
it's
going
just-
through this real quick, I see in certain areas or in certain sections, you just have a title, there's nothing under it. Light manufacturing. There's nothing on
It may be that.
Oh, actually, this is interesting, heaving.
Heaving, well, I'm not going to.
Oh, well, see? I told you we were going to find typos.
There's nothing there.
It may be, in some cases, it's because I want to make sure that we're having a conversation about whether we want it.
Right, we may not even
Oh,
want it
okay.
in the regs.
Fine.
So, and
It says anyone allowed use, so we don't have to spend a lot of time.
Okay.
I'll tell you, there's an entry on the use table for heliports. Okay, I put it there because
It's in Bristol.
you don't have it now. I'm not suggesting that you have it. I'm
You just put in
saying,
everything,
Residential
including the kitchen sink, and then we can then decide what we want.
no, I wouldn't say it's quite the kitchen sink.
Well-
It's a little bit more professional than
No,
that,
you know what
but.
I mean.
But I've put things in that I think you should consider. I'm happy to take them out. I did not, at least I think in the draft I gave you, did not include regulations for heliports. But if that's what you want, I can do that, and I have, several places I can draw from if, and that's just sort of, in a way, that's kind of the most absurd thing, but.
Yeah,
But
sure
where
you're
there isn't
pressed to do
anything, it is because I want you to think about whether you want it in the first
Yeah, I
place.
see recreation and fitness commercial. There's nothing there. But the title. And so therefore we decide, do we want it?
Right.
Okay?
And
So,
there's
so our next meeting is 4 weeks.
Okay.
Until the 7th, that's all, November 7th.
If the election's the 8th, and that's 2 weeks away.
Oh, thank God.
That's right. Absentee, Jeff.
So when is the next meeting?
November 7th.
Monday. Okay.
So we can feedback any things that we're thinking of before then, and you will be there on November 7th.
Yes.
Cool.
Or we just start marking up.
Exactly. And right, and Leslie will be there, so even if you don't email her,
Just start marking this up.
Right.
Okay.
exactly.
Yes, you can do it either way.
Mhm.
It's actually, I think it might be better, I'm happy to take emails from anybody, any member of the public. Terry, feel free to give out my email. If people have questions, again, it's all part of that process of, people don't understand it, it's hard to say I like it or I don't like it.
That's what I wanted to ask, Chairman, thank you for inviting me. What role, if any, do you see EDC? Because of, we're obviously support what you're doing, but is there a role that EDC can play or support in this process?
I think coming to the meetings and start weighing in on the discussions, I think would be great, so that by the time we go for a public hearing, the more people that are on board and get it, the better. So it'd be great to have EDC.
We were in a meeting this morning about signs around town, but I was explaining to Jamie that one of the reasons for this is to increase our tax base, and i.e. bring in more businesses, which is
Something we
EDC.
talk about at every meeting.
right, which is EDC. So I thought it was great to. Thanks for coming.
So how wide do you want to distribute these materials? Do you want them, by email to people that ask for them? Do you want them posted on our website to stimulate any conversation? How wide, what would you like to have this distributed?
Well, I don't know what you think, but it's freedom of information, so everything that happened at this meeting can go on the website. And I think that's fine. And people will read it and have comments. And I think at the bottom of the thing, it's got Leslie's email, so if there's somebody wants to comment, they can comment.
We would be happy to do that, we just wanted your direction.
No, I think so. And, but I will- since we have a lot of these, we should send them out to the, I think we definitely want to send them to the rest of the commission that isn't here, and maybe we should be
ZBA
sending them to ZBA,
and
and you could send them to EDC if we have.
Great.
Yeah, so more people that are involved in the initial, easier when we say we want to pass this.
Yeah, and it's, I really see our next meeting as a working meeting.
Yeah.
That, if we actually meet it's your regular meeting. Well, it doesn't matter. Just in a way that, it's just
Yeah.
nice to have a setup where,
I agree.
we can maybe get.
Well, let's see, we still may be able to do that. I don't even know what's on our agenda for that night.
Okay.
The guy who didn't show up the last time is on the agenda.
Yeah.
The guy who didn't show up the last time is on the agenda for the next time. he shows.
Maybe.
The home office.
The home office,
Yeah.
home business, right.
It's usually not a long
It's
discussion.
not a long discussion.
And one
But
other
if that's the
thing
case,
is,
then maybe
like,
what we can do is, are we allowed to just change, can we make our meeting earlier if we want to like start our P and Z meeting, or we always have to stick to 7:30 because that's when we
We
always.
have it noticed
As long as you have a notice.
as at 7:30, but you could start a special meeting earlier.
Mhm.
You call a special meeting earlier
And then stop, do,
and do the meeting.
and then go back. Okay.
yeah.
What time do you want to do? 6:30, 7?
I was thinking 7, but
That's
we'll
fine.
we'll have Chris send the thing around for
Okay.
everybody.
Just make sure I have it right in the calendar. And I just want to thank you all for your understanding about I had to cancel the last meeting. So
No problem at all.
appreciate that. It's-
It's the only excuse we were going to accept, so it's okay.
Hey,
Okay, excellent.
I'd run out of them
Do
all.
we have to make a formal motion to adjourn?
I move.
Second.
Out.
You're very welcome.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Glad to